So after months of tension around the Real Madrid manager's job, a Supercopa final El Clasico loss to Barcelona was basically the last straw for Xabi Alonso. The match in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia ended 3-2 to Barca, and despite Real Madrid getting a couple of goals back, it wasn't enough to get the much-needed win. It wasn't enough to also see Alonso keep his job as the manager of Los Blancos. He barely made it through his first year, just 233 days out of the 3-year contract he signed last summer when he took over from Carlo Ancelotti. The club announced his departure on January 12, 2026, calling it a mutual agreement, though people close to Alonso say the contract he signed in 2025 already included exit clauses. So where did it all go wrong? And how did Alonso go from winning an unprecedented title in Germany to being sacked a couple of years later? Transition. When you look at the numbers, Alonso's record wasn't terrible on paper. 34 games with 24 wins, 4 draws, and 6 losses across all competitions. But for Real Madrid standards, that's pretty rough around the edges, especially when you look at how the team has played all season. He was announced as the Madrid manager in late May 2025, with the big presentation happening the next day. He had just wrapped up his time in Germany with Bayer Leverkusen and decided not to jump straight into another job. He probably needed a rest after what he'd accomplished there. He signed for 3 years, taking him through to June 30, 2028, stepping into the massive shoes left by Carlo Ancelotti, who had gone off to coach Brazil's national team. Now, Alonso didn't just get this job handed out to him. He had serious credentials. At Leverkusen, he led them to an unbeaten Bundesliga title in the 2023-24 season. He put an end to Bayern Munich's 11 straight title run. That's the kind of thing that gets you noticed. Plus, he's got history with Madrid as he played there from 2009 to 2014 and made 236 appearances and won the Champions League in 2014. He is no doubt a proper Madrid legend, someone who gets what the club is about. His work at Leverkusen was honestly pretty brilliant from a tactical standpoint. He ran this fluid 3-4-3 formation that changed into a 3-2-5 when they had the ball. It was all about positional play, pressing hard when they lost possession, and building from the back with these intricate short passing sequences. He gave his players structure but also freedom to express themselves, which is a tricky balance to nail. The wingbacks were key to the whole thing. He used them asymmetrically. One would drop back into defense while the other moved forward. They were obsessed with counter-pressing, winning the ball back immediately after losing it, and they exploited spaces through these coordinated rotations. When they had possession, they dominated it, played through the lines and adapted their shape defensively to a 5-4-1. During build-up, especially from goal kicks, they'd often shift into a 4-2-4 to create numerical advantages, overload one side, and then ping it across to the opposite wingback who had all this space to work with. It was textbook modern football, disciplined, aware of your surroundings, and flexible. Leverkusen controlled the games from start to finish, and scored a lot of goals as well. They also finished the Bundesliga season unbeaten, and almost the entire season if not for an Europa League final loss to Atalanta. So when Alonso showed up at Madrid in summer 2025, expectations were sky high, and honestly, he delivered at first. Even though they were eliminated from the Club World Cup after a heavy defeat to PSG, the team won 7 straight games to start the La Liga season. They scored 16 goals and only let in 4. By early November 2025, they had a 5-point lead at the top of La Liga and had beaten Barca in the first El Clasico meeting of the season. Everything was coming up good. Alonso tried to transplant what worked at Leverkusen to Madrid. Same 3-4-3 that shifted to 3-2-5 in possession. The center backs would split wide, and a midfielder, usually Aurelien Tchouameni, would drop into the defensive line to create this 3-box-3 shape. The goalkeeper was actively involved in the build-up. The whole idea was to progress through thirds with precision, get the wingbacks involved to create threats, maintain controlled possession, and press like your life depended on it when you lost the ball. But then, it all went sideways, fast. The wheels started coming off with a brutal 5-2 loss to Atletico Madrid at the end of September 2025. 5 goals conceded against a local rival. The defense looked lost. Then came a 1-0 defeat to Liverpool in the Champions League in early November, and suddenly Madrid could barely win anything. Between November and December 2025, they won just 1 match out of 5 in the league, and the results were pretty disappointing. A 0-0 draw at Rayo Vallecano, where they couldn't score despite having chances, then a 2-2 draw at Elche, a 1-1 at Girona, and a 4-3 win at Olympiacos that somehow felt like a loss because they conceded 3 goals. There was a brief moment of hope with a 3-0 win at Athletic Club, but then reality came crashing back with a 2-0 home loss to Celta Vigo. That Celta match was particularly ugly, as the team just got taken apart, and that very night there were explicit threats that Alonso might get the sack. 3 days later, they lost 2-1 to Manchester City in the Champions League, and at that point, Alonso was basically standing on the edge of a cliff. Tactically, Alonso kept tinkering, trying different shapes to fit all his best players on the pitch, but the team just never clicked. They lost their identity. The pressing, which had been so intense and organized, became lazy and disjointed. Over the last 5 matches of this rough patch, they were averaging just fewer interceptions per game in advanced areas than they'd been managing earlier in the season. It was a massive drop-off. The build-up play started falling apart under pressure, and the attack was completely lopsided. Everything ran through the left side where Vinicius Jr. and sometimes Kylian Mbappe operate. Meanwhile, the right side was a mixed bag of Franco Mastanuono, Rodrigo, Brahim Diaz, and Federico Valverde, and none of them could generate the same kind of threat. It was predictable, and teams figured it out. And the injuries didn't help. The defense got absolutely decimated with Antonio Rudiger, Eder Militao, Dani Carvajal, David Alaba, Dean Huijsen, Ferland Mendy, and Trent Alexander-Arnold all missing at various points. I mean, when you're trying to implement a complex tactical system and half your backline is in the treatment room, you're basically doomed from the start. So Alonso was suddenly fighting for his job with every game. He had worked miracles at Leverkusen, and here was a chance to bring that same magic to the biggest club in the world. But it just didn't work out. And honestly, the unraveling was messy in ways nobody really expected. Alonso never settled on a consistent lineup in La Liga. He was making an average of over 3 changes per game, which sounds like he was searching for something that just wasn't clicking. The squad stability was pretty much non-existent. And look, rotation isn't inherently bad, but when you're constantly shuffling the deck, it's hard for any rhythm to develop. Young players like Arda Güler would show flashes of good moments, but then there would be these positional lapses that left the backline completely exposed. It was exciting and frustrating in equal measure, but the real problems were happening behind closed doors. The dressing room situation got complicated pretty quickly. There were clashes with key players, and the whole thing came to a head with Vinicius Jr.'s reaction to being subbed off during the October 2025 Clásico. At that moment, whatever was said or not said became this tipping point that people pointed to later. Reports started coming out about friction with Valverde and others, though some players like Jude Bellingham, to his credit, denied there was any rift. Still, when those stories keep surfacing, there's usually at least some fire behind the smoke. The squad itself seemed genuinely unhappy with how Alonso was running training. Players felt the intensity and pace clashed with what they actually needed, whether that was recovery time or a different approach entirely. And Alonso was frustrated too, annoyed that players weren't following his instructions the way they had at Leverkusen. It was this feedback loop of disappointment on both sides. Then there's the Antonio Pintus situation. The fitness coach had been a huge part of Madrid's success in previous years, and people within the club were suggesting Alonso bring him back, especially as the injury crisis got worse and worse. But Alonso refused. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe it was about maintaining control over his methods. But whatever the case, the injuries kept piling up and it became another point of contention. And hovering over all of this was Florentino Perez. The club president's influence is always there at Madrid, but the board's frustration with the injuries and player management added this extra pressure that probably made everything harder. The results on the pitch told their own story. That 4-0 hammering by PSG in the Club World Cup final back in July 2025, in what was supposed to be a statement match, a chance to show what this new Madrid could be. Instead, they conceded 4 and looked defensively all over the place. But that was quickly forgotten when he started the season well, but it went sideways. By December, Madrid had strung together 3 straight wins, which looked good on paper, but anyone actually watching the games could tell you the performances were rough. After that 2-0 win over Sevilla, the fans were literally booing. That tells you everything about how unconvincing it all felt, and everything led to Saudi Arabia in the Spanish Super Cup. Honestly, the Supercopa run was bizarre. They beat Atletico in the semi-final, despite being outplayed for large stretches. Then came the final against Barcelona. 3 goals conceded, no real consistent response from Madrid, and that was essentially it. The end. Add to the fact that Real Madrid dropped points against teams they really shouldn't have. Rayo Vallecano, Elche, Girona, and then actually lost at home to Celta and Manchester City. You know how it goes at a club like Madrid. When results go south, everyone's scrambling to find someone to blame. The media went into full manhunt mode, and the club wasn't far behind. What happened next got confusing fast. Alonso's agent came out and said the whole narrative about whether it was a resignation or a sacking didn't really matter. The bottom line was he wasn't the coach anymore. But reports were all over the place. Some said he was sacked outright. Others claimed it was mutual consent. In his statement afterward, Alonso struck a pretty gracious tone. He talks about leaving with respect and pride, said he'd done his best, expressed some regret but also gratitude. The decision caught a lot of people by surprise, even though the underlying problems had been pretty visible for months. The team wasn't improving. The defensive issues weren't getting fixed, and they were most times only masked by Thibaut Courtois pulling off save after save. And there's only so long you can rely on your goalkeeper to save you. Alvaro Arbeloa, who'd been working with the reserve team since June 2025, stepped in right away as interim until Madrid finds another manager. It's a shame, really. Alonso clearly has talent as a coach. He was linked with the likes of Liverpool and Bayern before, and maybe in a different situation with more control. With a squad that was more aligned with his vision from the start, things could have been different. But at Real Madrid, the margins are so thin and the pressure so intense that even the smallest crack can turn into something much bigger. And that's exactly what happened here. So was it a case of not handling the Madrid ego in the dressing room? Or was Alonso just not cut out for the job?